Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another live at the waterhole. We've started the afternoon at Juma with some elephants having a pool party. What a wonderful way to start the day. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time joining us, a very warm welcome. We will be spending the next 2 hours moving between various different cameras that we have all across southern and eastern Africa. And as it says there, I will be your host, Ben Coley, for those 2 hours and hopefully being able to add a little bit more substance to what it is that we are viewing. And because it's live and interactive, you are very much encouraged to send in any of your questions or your comments through to the relevant channels. They will be fed through to me, and hopefully I can answer some of those questions on air for you, and we can have an interesting debate about some unusual behaviours and experiences that we are viewing. But what a great way to start with some frolicking elephants. So lots of play going on. It's nothing quite like the enjoyment shown by elephants during this time of the year, making hay while the sun shines, as it were. Of course, they had a very, very dry winter period. We had quite late rains here. Those of you who are not familiar with this dam at Juma, there was basically no water here at all for a couple of months after it all dried up. But thanks to a couple of 100 millimeters of rain around about a month ago or so, it has now become a veritable ocean, and these elephants, as you can see, utterly delighting in this watery oasis. A great opportunity to see them at their playful best. You can see this happening quite often, the sort of mounting behavior. Very likely to be two bulls, and this is nothing untoward going on there. It's quite normal between young bulls and elephants, and also young males and other animals. Lions, giraffes, you'll often find the young males mounting each other. It's a show of dominance and just establishing those social hierarchies at an early age. It's like a submarine elephant or two going across there using their trunks as snorkels. But very comfortable in water elephants, more than capable of swimming in deep water. They can and have been recorded swimming in salt water across channels and oceans and things. It's not ideal for them with the salt reacting with their skin, but they're more than capable. Their large body mass, big body cavities giving them a natural buoyancy despite their enormous size. And those big padded feet are actually surprisingly good oars that they can use to propel them through the water. They kind of do the classic doggy paddle, just pumping those legs forward and backwards, and they can move with surprising ease and say use that trunk as a snorkel. Good afternoon to Bill. Bill, I'm glad you could join us, saying hello to myself, the rest of the chatters, the team in Johannesburg, and of course Nadine, who is the director today. She is in my ear feeding me through all of these wonderful questions. And hello to Ari as well from Amersfoort in the Netherlands. And Penelope Kenyon as well. Lovely to hear from you. Fuzzy Dunlop, indeed. What a great way to start a Monday morning with an elephant pool party. And likewise greetings to Colin Eames and Joanne Mello. Everybody saying hello this morning. Always such a pleasure to know there are so many people enjoying these pictures and that we can bring a little bit of the African wilderness into your lives wherever you may be. I'm always surprised we don't see more elephants actually getting completely submerged into the water like we are doing here. Often we see elephants and they just come down and they'll have a drink at the side of the dam, but not often do they actually venture into the depths and roll around like this. I'm not quite sure why they wouldn't choose to do it more often. Maybe they're nervous of crocodiles or hippos, but for elephants this size, neither should pose a particularly major problem for them. Can understand if they do have youngsters with them that they might be a little bit more tentative. And you would think with the extra buoyancy given to them by the water, it would be a perfect opportunity to take some of that great weight off those pillar-like legs that they've got. But these ones very much relishing in the opportunity. I saw a few elephant pool parties up at Madikwe when I was doing some wild earth back in the Escape to Nature days a couple of years ago, but not something so that I see very regularly. Although this time of year, so it's not unexpected, but it's a shame it doesn't happen more often. Bill, you're also enjoying the pool party. Yep, at Gowrie Dam. So as I said, it's having been at Juma in December, where there was, if I'm lucky, I would say there was about a 2 meter square patch of rather moist mud. That's about as much as I could describe it as. The catfish and things that were there flopping around when there was just a bit of sludge there had all either been eaten or more than likely buried themselves underneath the surface layer, as catfish are able to cover themselves in a sort of a mucus that enables them to avoid desiccation, to avoid drying out. But they will have all erupted now, I'm sure. And there will be plenty of fish there. There's always more fish than you might think in a dam like this. You wonder where they've all come from, particularly if the dam has completely dried up and then suddenly fills with water, and miraculously it is fully stocked with fish again, it seems. But there seems to be various schools of thought. We know that some species of fish, as I just said, can bury themselves in the mud and survive for longer periods. But there are also ideas that a lot of bird eggs get transported to these water sources on the soles of birds' feet. So you have wading birds that are at another water source. Fish eggs are often quite sticky because they are designed to actually affix to the vegetation underwater for safety. Quite camouflaged. The stickiness also allows the soil and the dust and the mud in the water and the sediment to stick to the eggs to camouflage them from potential predators. And then there's a very good chance that a lot of those eggs get stuck on the feet of ducks or other wading birds. They then come to an area like this that has newly been restocked with water. The eggs are released and continue their development process and come out as little baby fish. Amazing how it all works. Harriet Hodgkin, good afternoon to you as well from a lovely day in Cape Town. That's nice to hear. And yes, you've made it just in time for pool opening. So we should put some lanes in there so that those that don't want to play around like this can just do their laps in peace. At least gives us a good idea of the depth of the water there as well. Right, well, what a wonderful way to start a Monday live the waterhole. But we had some very interesting goings on at Tembe Elephant Park down in Maputo land earlier. So let's head over there and I will fill you in. Okay, so apologies any sensitive viewers, but for those of you who are unaware of what happened earlier, this has been going on for a little while. That, unfortunately, is the carcass of a young impala which was taken by a huge python sometime during the night. There is footage of it. You can go and find out if you want to see it all actually happening. And the python attempted to swallow this antelope, but was unable to do so. We think even the horns, by the sound of it, had perforated the skin of the snake, which is not unusual when they swallow very large horned prey like this. But for whatever reason, the snake gave up, regurgitated the part of the impala that it had swallowed, and has since left the area. But that is a woolly neck stork, which obviously just came over to investigate. But obviously, with it being a python, there's no open wound for scavengers like vultures or crows or anything like that to get into yet. So these things that don't have bills designed for actually tearing flesh and opening the carcasses are going to have to wait a little while, either for the larger vulture species to come down, or for a hyena or a jackal or some other thing with the stronger set of jaws that's going to make it available to other animals. I don't know whether the stork would actually have fed on it. I don't, but marabou storks do. So I don't know of any cases of woolly neck storks scavenging, but certainly not an impossibility. You never know. Rebecca Bishop, yes, it is sad, poor little baby impala, but unfortunately, so that is the nature of things out here, quite literally, the circle of life. What is a shame is that the impala lost its life, and it seems that the python didn't get its meal either. So it's a bit of a lose-lose situation. But there will be nothing left of this very, very soon. Other things will benefit from the sacrifice of this impala. It's always difficult to see death out in nature, but it is a reality, and it's the way things are supposed to be. What I've certainly found in my guiding career is many people, one of the things at the top of their bucket lists to see is actually predators making a kill, to actually witness that brutality of nature firsthand. But I would also say that the vast majority of people who are fortunate enough to witness it, because it's not something that you see every day. We see a lot of hunts and a lot of failed attempts, but to actually witness the moment of impact and the death of that animal at the hands of a predator is not something you see very often. But the majority of people who are fortunate enough to witness it realize very quickly that in hindsight, it's not actually as easy to watch as they might have once thought. To actually hear that animal struggling and fighting for its life, and ultimately, sorry to be brutal about it, but being literally ripped apart in front of your eyes, is quite a harrowing experience for some people. And I've had a lot of guests who wanted to see it, have been lucky enough to see it, and have actually requested to leave very soon after or whilst it was happening because they just didn't have the stomach for it. It's one of those things that's very difficult to explain unless you actually do experience it firsthand. Good morning to you, Sandy Franklin 69. I'm glad you could join us. And Heidi, yes, you're right. What a sighting it was at Tembe this morning. And you never know, maybe the python will come back and have another go. By all accounts, the python slithered off to the right somewhere to the bushes. So whether or not it has vacated the area, I highly doubt it. It would have expended quite a lot of energy getting even as far as it did get. With snakes being cold-blooded, there's a good chance that it's just resting and recuperating under a bush. But I would imagine it's probably decided that it is just too much of a mouthful and may have to go elsewhere. But it just shows the power and the size of some of the pythons we do get around here. Biggest one I've ever seen It's around about 4 meters in length and at least as thick as my thigh. And actually saw one here in Hoodsprose only a few months ago, which we think had swallowed either a baby impala or a daker. It looked like it had swallowed a medicine ball. The thing could barely move. It finally did make its way into the bushes and was there for the next 2 or 3 days, at least, while it was digesting that enormous meal. So good chance there's a python sheltering somewhere in there. But not often you get to see those massive pythons. Seeing 1 meter, 1.5 meter pythons in an evening on a hot summer's time of year like this, not impossible out on a drive. But those really massive ones we don't see all that often. Mike, you're asking if the scavengers can't open the carcass, will the maggots take over? Well, don't forget the maggots are coming from flies. Maggots are baby flies, they're fly larvae, and generally they will be laid on open wounds or in open flesh. So it'll take a little bit of time for that to happen, but I can assure you that something will find it as the temperature warms up and the smell of death does permeate through the bushveld. Something will find it. They've got very good noses, and so even the eagles and the vultures. Again, it's rather brutal to say, but they'll come down and they'll pick at the bits they can get to. So the eyes, maybe inside the mouth, around the anus, those areas, possibly even the softer underbelly around the groin for the stronger raptors with those notched hooked beaks, which are designed for opening flesh. So it won't be long until something finds it, I have no doubt. And then, yes, there will always be flies and there will always be maggots. But that is what they do. They are reprocessing that material, ultimately making it available to the nutrient cycle for the next generation of things that will grow from it. And you do get very specific fly species that arrive at very specific times on a carcass. It's one of the ways that forensic pathologists are able to estimate the time of death of people. They look at the insect life which is growing there and are able to then very, very accurately establish a time of death based on the developmental phase of certain species, which is, say, not a job that I would want to do, but amazing that nature is so specific and all of those niches are utilized slightly differently by different species to avoid overpopulating a site at one time or one place. Now, I agree, Nadine, that's not a job that I would want to have, but it's a tried and tested, proven method that works. But yeah, not one for the faint-hearted, or the squeamish, that's for sure. Jess, you can find python in trees. Absolutely, they do. They do climb trees. Certainly. Well, we will most definitely be keeping an eye on this camera just in case our python decides to show itself and slither into the open. But it sounds like we might have something special down at Founders Lodge in the Eastern Cape. Let's go have a look. Ah, always a treat to see a rhino sheltering under the tree. Looks like might be having a bit of a scratch of the horn. Just instinctually trying to keep it in good condition, but also dealing with those pesky flies that try and, or moths really, that try and lay their eggs on the base of the horn. You can kind of see the base of the horn there. It almost has like a fluffy appearance. That's the pieces of keratin that are sort of, what's the word I want? Fraying. There we go. It's kind of fraying through the rubbing. but we get those horn moths which do feed on keratin, and there are other fly species that try and lay their eggs at the base of the horn, as well as things like bot flies that go for the nose. But any excuse to have a good scratch. Hopefully he'll come down and have a mud wallow as well. But we are very fortunate to have this camera at Mantis Founders Lodge down in the Eastern Cape. It's the only camera that we are allowed to show rhinos on, and so it's always very special where we do get to see them. We've seen quite a few here over the months. So hopefully this one will come down and have a little roll around in the mud. We often get the warthogs down here as well, taking advantage. Usually lots of fun and games at Founders. Randy, no, well, it's semantics, isn't it? Do rhinos have hair on their horns? You could argue that their horn is hair. It is just made out. Oh, there are the warthogs right on cue. It is made out of keratin, which is what hair is made out of. It's just a very compacted lattice of hair. And when it does fray at the bottom, I suppose you could argue that that is like hair. But if you're referring to hair like you can see on the warthog, or that you have the rhino has on its body of those actual follicles, then no. Remember, you can think of a rhino's horn as a giant fingernail. If you've ever seen a rhino's skull, there is no horn. It's not like a giraffe or an impala, where the horn is bone that's fused to the skull and then has that keratin sheath over it in the case of a horn, or for the giraffe, just has skin and fur over the bone. Uh, that is, entire horn is a protrusion that just grows from a sort of a flattened plate on the bridge of the nose of the rhino. And it's surprisingly flexible. I've had the opportunity to touch a rhino's horn as part of some dehorning exercises and things. I've been fortunate enough to do that on more than one occasion, and it is flexible. You can hold it and move it around almost like a joystick. Important that it has that flexibility so that it doesn't break when used in territorial or protection confrontations. Sparse, I've never officially seen one of those moths that I know of. They're forever apparently I think they're very, very small, but trying to lay their eggs on horns and hooves or anywhere where there is keratin. But they do a pretty good job of fending them off. Where you do get to see them, or certainly evidence of them, is on a deceased animal, on a carcass. Anywhere around here, if you find a buffalo skull in particular, you'll often find those, they almost look like dreadlocks, those sort of brown tubes hanging off them. And that's basically a mixture of silk and frass, which is insect droppings, basically. So the larvae burrow into the keratin. They then feed on the keratin from the inside of that layer of horn. They'll have a little hole there and they defecate outside it. They mix it with silk. They create their little tube. And then ultimately that's where they pupate from and will emerge from as adult moths when the timing is right. But I don't think you'll ever see it on a living creature because it's constantly in use and scratching, and there never is the opportunity to allow those larvae or the eggs to hatch and for the larvae to live out their life cycles. And yes, I have seen a rhino tick before, strangely not on a rhino, that I know of, but I've seen one in a game viewer before that we've somehow picked up, and I was able to identify it. If I remember rightly, they have sort of orange spots or orange stripes and spots on them, but not many of them around, certainly. And Catherine, I'm very glad that you got to see both black and white rhinos, both with calves by the sound of it, on your recent trip here. Very happy to hear that. Not often that you see black rhino. I might see a black rhino once every year if I'm lucky, and even then it tends to be just a pretty quick sighting. They do prefer to hang out in the thicker vegetation. They're usually a little bit more skittish than the white rhinos. So very, very special to see a black rhino. I think it took me a good few years of being in Africa and guiding full time before I was fortunate enough to see one. I think one memorable sighting I had for probably 10 years ago now was a black rhino and a white rhino in the same sighting that actually came together and sort of touched nose or touched noses, and they actually had a little interaction. That was amazing to see. But very special to see our rhino. We'll keep an eye on him and see if he comes down to the water for a drink or a bit of a wallow. But in the meantime, I think we're going to zoom up north all the way to Old Onyo in Kenya and enjoy some giraffe and elephants. Beautiful. Nice big elephant bull. Looks like he might be in must. See some secretions from that temporal gland. And we've been very lucky over the last few days to see multiple giraffes coming to have a drink here at Old Onyo. Just the giraffe looks at the elephant with a hint of jealousy about how easy it is for the elephant to drink. Just put that big straw down, as opposed to going through all of this ridiculous flexing. It amazes me the stresses that must be on those joints in the giraffe's front legs. How important it must be to have a sure footing. You wouldn't want to slip when you're down in that situation. Always beautiful to see the giraffe throwing those S's of water as they pop their necks back up straight. A couple of oxpeckers in tow as normal, but quick drink and head off. Giraffe don't normally hang around for too long. Of course, very vulnerable position for them to have to lean forward to get a drink like that. So they'll only drink when necessary. Quite capable of going days without water if they have to, but will still take the opportunity when the opportunity arises. Elephant, on the other hand, very different digestive system, far less efficient, needs to eat much, much more, doesn't absorb anywhere near as much of the contents of that food, and obviously with a much bigger bulk, has a huge water requirement. Anything for an elephant of this size, 150, maybe even 200 litres of water a day. PB and Jamie asking if it's common for elephants and giraffes to share a small waterhole like this. I think it depends on the area. I wouldn't say it's. Trying to decide my choice of words. Normally, you'll find the giraffe are a bit tentative on a small waterhole like this to share it with elephants because elephants can be a little bit possessive over their water. But if you go to areas maybe into Etosha where water is at a premium, there you see vast groups of animals all sharing water holes. I think there is an unspoken truce that everybody needs water, ourselves included. So they do tend to tolerate each other better, but always need to be careful as another animal if there are elephants present, particularly if there are young bulls. The young bulls do get a little bit feisty and they like to try and show off to any other young bulls in the group that they are big and strong, and they will often make a habit of chasing away other animals, even birds and impalas and other little things. And of course, the very famous incident that I mentioned yesterday that happened probably 6 months or 8 months or so ago or so here with the poor elephant that got skewered, sorry, the poor giraffe that got skewered by an elephant that came down to have a drink. But from my experience of watching this waterhole, normally the giraffe just sort of hang around in the peripheries, and once the elephants move off, then the giraffes come in for a drink. You can see this one's thinking about it. Maybe she's plucked up sufficient courage by watching the other giraffe have a drink there with no problems. Maybe this elephant's giving off a vibe of hospitality, which is a bit surprising if he is in must. He's giving her a little stare at least. Almost look at this elephant looking at the giraffe saying, "Really?" But he does look to be quite relaxed. Trying to see whether we can see any evidence of the must between his back legs, with the penis constantly dripping urine, staining the back legs. A bit hard to see if he's been spraying mud over himself. But don't forget that male elephants can also secrete that temperin, not just when they're in must. It could be as some sort of emotional response to something, but that looks like a solid enough stream to be at least part, maybe just coming into or coming out of a must period. It's definitely Groenewold. Yes, it is nice to see the elephants allowing the giraffe to drink. They're often not too tolerant up here at Old Donyo, these big bulls. This one being very accommodating today. Bill, you're asking about One Ton, the famous elephant up there at Old Donyo. I have to say I've never seen One Ton while I've been doing a live at the waterhole up here. So I'm not sure if anybody has seen him recently on the cameras. Those of you who are avid viewers, particularly of this cam, if anyone does know the last time he was sighted, do let us all know, please. Good afternoon to Erica Oldno. Greetings from sunny Cape Town. Glad to hear it's still sunny in Cape Town. I know the weather can change in minutes down there. Yes, I'm glad you're all enjoying a hot sunny day. Johan, oh, you're asking how long can an elephant survive without water? Well, as with all of these questions, there's a lot of factors to take into account and variables, the age of the elephant, what time of year, what's the ambient temperature, is there plenty of moisture in the vegetation that it is eating? But on average, I would think not too dissimilar to us, only 3 or 4 days before things get really, really serious. Um, but elephants do have that very special adaptation of that pharyngeal pouch on their neck, where they can store a couple of liters of water for safekeeping to be used in times of stress. So if you ever do see during a really dry period what looks like an elephant sticking its trunk down its throat and then suddenly seeming to either drink something or spray some water on itself or possibly even spray water or provide water for a youngster, then they are accessing that little pouch. So it's like having your own little bladder or your own little water bottle halfway down the throat. Oh, scratchy leg. It's obviously a very established game trail, and most of the elephants seem to come and go from that big umbrella thorn, particularly off to the right. He's going to go left because I've said that now, but there's obviously some very established game paths leading to this waterhole. And so they're just animals are just like us. They'll generally take the path of least resistance. Those game paths are kept clear by foot traffic, be it from elephants, from antelope species, whatever else comes down. It's usually a lot easier to walk on an established path than it is to smash a pathway through the bush. So those game paths are very much a sort of the veins of a bushveld ecosystem. We also use them as well when walking through the bush. Much easier to walk down a game path, less thorns. It's not wet if there's morning dew, then you don't get moisture and grass seeds stuck all over your feet. Just always be aware that other animals are using it as well, and you may have to give right of way to something. It's definitely Schludefeld. Yes, if only a leopard could be in that tree. How nice would that be if there was a leopard sprawled across one of those branches in the way only a leopard can? I have had 1 or 2 sightings like that over the years of a leopard lying in a tree and elephants happily feeding off the same tree in and around the base of that tree, somewhere on a hard drive that I think was either taken from me without permission, shall we say, from a bag, or more than likely one of the ones that have died over the years. I did have some pictures when I was at Savi Savi of a female leopard up a knobthorn with a herd of elephants underneath. With a good chance to have a scratch on the back of the ears. But it does sound as if our pool party down in Juma is still in full effect. So I think let's head back down to Juma and watch the Ellies in the water for a bit. I think we're just having a scan around to see if there is anything else at Juma. You never know, maybe Stephanie Groenevold, maybe there is a leopard lolling in one of these trees somewhere. We won't know unless we check. It's the problem with only having one camera, of course. You never know what's happening behind you. And people often make that mistake. Those of you who are avid photographers who come out and they are so intent on photographing something, it's very easy to get tunnel vision or lens vision, and you're constantly staring down the camera, trying to get the perfect photo, taking hundreds of pictures of the lion whilst it's yawning. And you don't see that 90 degrees off to the right, there's a leopard with cubs that's walking past. We have that quite often. People get so fixated on trying to get the perfect shot that they forget to enjoy the all-encompassing experience of being out in the bush and all the different facets of it. It's a 360-degree experience, not just from a horizontal point of view. You've got to look up for birds, maybe a leopard in a tree, down on the ground in front of you for the interesting bugs, or maybe the little ground nesting uh, bird nest that you're walking close by, or the scorpion hole. It really is a completely immersive experience to spend time in the bush properly. Lady Macbeth, I've seen that FC have sent me through a link that you've sent them about the elephant trunk musculature, as we had a discussion a little while ago about whether elephants can get cramp and just how that trunk actually works and how dexterous it is, and all those little rings of muscle, 40,000 at least individual muscles that allow that trunk to move in all directions, to pick up a leaf, but also pick up 400 or 500 kilograms worth of weight. It truly is an incredible organ. But yeah, I'll definitely go and have a look at that. Thank you very much. But how nice is this to just see the heads of elephants posing as hippos? Well, I hope everybody is enjoying that. We thought we would just give you some quiet time without me talking over the top of all the action for a change and just enjoy the sounds of elephants splashing around in the water. Didn't get any vocalizations as such, but still very special just to hear them moving. And sound is such an important part of the bush. I always recommend to guests, particularly that sort of late afternoon when our eyesight's beginning to fail, if you just cup your ears, put your hands behind your ears and sort of push them forwards a little bit and use the cupped palm of your hand to increase the catchment area of your pinnae, the cartilaginous bit of your external ears, and you can capture so much more sound, about 35% more sound than you would otherwise hear. And it's really special to just sit and take in some of those sounds, particularly if you've got a herd of elephants or a herd of buffalo moving through the grass this time of year. You can just really get a sense of what's going on. But they really do look to be having an absolute blast. It's just very relaxing to watch and just listen. You don't have to talk over everything all the time. But Quinn, I said a little while ago you asked which mammal species do I think is the most playful. Honestly, I would think elephants. They're always interacting with each other, particularly the youngsters. They've just got bundles of energy and they seem to really enjoy showing it. But lots of other animals can be under the right circumstances. I've seen lions on a nice cool morning running and jumping on one another, particularly the juveniles. I think mongooses are always interacting with each other. If you joined us yesterday, you would have seen the beautiful sighting we had of the banded mongoose rolling around together and sort of play fighting and establishing dominance and hierarchies within their group. Jackals can be quite playful as well. What else is particularly playful? I'll give it some more thought, and if I can come up with anything else obvious, I'll let you know. But the elephant for me is the most playful of all. I mean, just look at what we're witnessing at the moment. It does look as if a few of the herd members have disappeared. This is most likely going to be the young bulls, which are just hanging out on the periphery of the herd, beginning that slow separation process. As they begin to get more mature, their testosterone levels, their confidence levels are building, beginning to become slightly more independent, and their bodies and their brains just telling them that this is the lifestyle that they are going to lead. And eventually, mothers and matriarchs will sever that connection, cut those apron strings, and tell them it's time to go off into the big bad world themselves. It's quite normal to see the teenagers hanging out just away from the main core of the group. Lavoyo, I'm glad you're enjoying these young Ellies, indeed enjoying a much needed cool down, but in this nice soothing cool water they can afford to burn all this energy with the buoyancy of it, not dehydrating themselves. All reasons why we're seeing perhaps a little bit more activity than we would see on land. This one having a proper splosh, completely submerging himself. was really special to see. I think let's just ring the changes a little bit. Let's head over to Madikwe up in the northwest to Tau Lodge and see what's happening at their waterhole. Well, it looks as if we have an extreme gaggle of Egyptian geese awaiting us at Tau. I don't know if anyone wants to try and count them, but there must be 15 or 20 of them there. I've seen a couple of massive groups of Egyptian geese recently at the big waterhole by the main camp in the Manileti Game Reserve. I probably counted in excess of 50 or 70 of them when I went through there a couple of months ago. And I remember last year sometime, just going to one of the areas in and around Hoedspruit, not a big game area, just a general game area, and there was a waterhole there, and I was there during the day, and there was one or two Egyptian geese perhaps. But I went there after dark to actually take some photographs of the night sky, and there must have been 200 or 300 geese. The whole dam was awash with Egyptian geese. I think there was more surface area of the water taken up by goose than there was by water. It was ridiculous. And where they all came from, where they all went, why they all ended up there, I have no explanation for you. But that was very strange to see. Literally hundreds of them. And there's our little blacksmith lapwing, avoiding the geese. Probably also thinking the same thing. Where did all these geese come from? It's also very nice to see a splash of colour here at Tau. As I say, this area behind the dam is often just dust, or it is during the winter, just nothing growing there. Amazing to think that hidden under that arid, barren expanse that we were viewing for months was all of these seeds which have suddenly, with the injection of a little bit of rain, have just completely covered that area in a blanket. And we're seeing these lovely yellow flowers. I'd love to tell you what they are, but we can't get close enough with the camera for me to be able to identify them. They're probably some sort of invasive species, because you often do get those sorts of things on these disturbed areas of land, also along rivers, those sorts of areas, because that's where the seeds end up, particularly along drainage line and rivers. You get a lot of alien vegetation, which can lead to its own problems, of course. I'd say maybe one of the sennas. Difficult to say from this far away. We've got some zebra and possibly the bottoms of a couple of elephants in the distance. There's mesmeric hail swishing going on throughout the dazzle. Dealing with all those flies, you can see all the insects, the butterflies and everything else moving around. So much happening this time of year. We've still got quite a few brown vein white butterflies flitting around in the hoodthroat area, as well as quite a few mosquitoes at the moment, which is a bit of a pain. And interestingly, where I stay, we've had a little bit of an influx of ant-mimicking spiders as well recently. I had to rescue about 5 or 6 which had fallen into some water close by, probably more. There must have been a whole bunch of spiderlings that had hatched somewhere. But nice to see the ant-mimicking spiders. First time I ever saw those was when breaking open one of those galls on a silver cluster leaf to show some guests that it was a cavity whereby a wasp larvae had lived out the first part of its life, eating that cellulose. And yeah, opened it up to find what I originally assumed to be ants, and then one of them started to descend from my hand on a piece of silk, and suddenly realised that I'd stumbled across a little group of young ant-mimicking spiders. Yeah, these flowers are just too small to identify. Possibly one of the Crolitarias, possibly one of the Sennas. Nidorella, maybe. But just a nice flash of colour in this otherwise green environment. Abutilons, maybe. Sorry, I know I'm just listing flower species now. I'm sort of thinking out loud. Plus, I'm glad that you're enjoying the zebras. It is a lovely view. Greens and yellows and the red soil on the mountains behind and the stripy contrast of the zebras. It's visual sensory overload. Daniel, zebra foals sort of on average between 6 to 12 months. Again, depends on the individual. But they'll drink just milk for the first month or two, and then as their stomach develops, they will then start eating mum's dung. That practice called coprophagy. That's going to get that bacteria and the microorganisms into the stomach and the cecum, which is necessary for it to start digesting its own food properly, and then we'll move on to a completely grass-based diet. So yeah, I would say on average, maximum up to about a year, but say remember exceptions to every rule. Again, always nice to watch some zebras, but it sounds like we have another Ellie having a drink at Oldonyo. So let's head back up to Kenya and enjoy some more elephants drinking. Another elephant with a floppy ear. In fact, I think this is one we saw yesterday with that characteristic hole in that left ear that you can see when he waves his ears back and forth, just cooling off in that warm East African sun. But there's little notches, little holes in the ears, little rips and tears, all good ways to identify individuals. So there's a lot of that water and mud being sprayed behind the ears. I would think particularly for this one with his floppy ear hanging forward, getting beaten by the sun, and a lot of it also being sprayed onto the belly as well, just to try and reflect, there we go, some of that heat rebounding off the floor, that infrared radiation being given off as the floor sends back a lot of that heat after it's been baked by the sun. Strange, just seems to be picking up a couple of pebbles and throwing it on his belly. Maybe he's got an itch there he was just trying to deal with in a different way. See that trunk working overtime, picking up all those smells other elephants that have been in this area. Oh, he's going to find a pipe, I think, for a drink. No? Which way I say, remember an incredible sense of smell, elephants. The massive nose, it's not a lot of nasal epithelium, which is the area where you find all those scent cells, if you want to call them that. And so there have been elephants used in tracking down thieves, even elephants potentially being employed to find mines in minefields in Mozambique after the Civil War. Lots of things again that we can learn from elephants and their adaptations. What's wrong, buddy? See, he looks a little bit distracted by something. It's sort of almost what we call displacement behavior. The way he was fiddling around with his trunk on the ground, throwing a stone around. Whether or not there's another elephant in the vicinity that he's smelling or hearing, or something that we just can't see on the camera that's distracting him. As you can see, he's not really feeding, he's not really drinking, well, he's not feeding, he's not drinking, he's not doing anything with the mud. It doesn't really look as if he's smelling anything with a huge amount of intent at the moment. Maybe there's some residual scent from one of the elephants that came before him that he doesn't like. Maybe some bad blood between him and another one. It's one of those signs to look out for if you're ever viewing elephants from a vehicle. Just watch them. If they start fiddling around, not doing anything in particular, or pretending to feed but not actually feeding, there's a chance that they're being bothered by something. Maybe it was this approaching giraffe. A novel way to scratch one's armpit. I think maybe the elephant was just not too keen on that giraffe approaching the water. Elephants don't like things right behind them. They can't see behind them. Those ears are in the way. Even though their eyes are on the side of their head, they can't see things directly behind them. And they do get a little bit twitchy, even in a car. If when you go directly behind their back legs and behind their spine, they sort of watch you out of the corner of their eye, just cocking their head to one side. But they don't like not being able to see what's going on. Okay, well, looks like our Illy has moved on. Well, there he is, but a bit difficult to see now. I think let's head back down to Founders Mantis Founders Lodge for a little bit. Let's check in on our rhino and see if those warthogs are still hanging around. Always fun to check in with the warthogs. Obviously found itself some little short grass there. Remember, warthogs quite capable of feeding on those very, very fresh shoots with that sort of shovel-nosed face that they've got. They can get right down to the ground, moving along on their wrists. And of course, very well known for feeding on what we call the rhizomes, which are the roots of grass, basically. So you'll often see them using their snouts to push over the soil and feeding on the root systems of that grass as well. Remember, particularly during the winter seasons, those perennial species of grass, the ones that do come back for a few years, they'll be storing a lot of their nutrients underneath the soil to avoid the baking sun. So you get annuals and perennials. So annual grasses are ones that just live for 1 year, normally found in disturbed places, the sides of roads. They're not very palatable. They're designed to sort of not be eaten by things, and they produce a huge number of seeds because they have just got one season to make the most of that reproductive opportunity. All grass is wind dispersed, so you'll get loads and loads of seeds off them, and once that parent plant dies, that's it. And then the next year, the offspring will grow back and take over that area, and the same thing will happen. And then the perennial grasses, which generally are a bit more palatable, a bit more substantial, those are the next level up. So pioneer grasses, the first ones, very often annuals, and then subclimax and climax grasses are usually perennials. One sleepy rhinoceros. Struggling to find a comfortable position. I know your feelings, Mr. Rhino. I had similar problems last night. Just get those evenings where you just can't get comfortable, as cutting off blood supply to an arm somewhere, or saying we should be able to detach our arms when we go to sleep. Well, much easier. Spas, you're asking how common is it to see elephants and giraffes doing coprophagia? Well, elephants not uncommon. Hang around with some young elephants for long enough, and you will see them feeding on mum's dung. But giraffes not known to practice osteophagia, different digestive system. As ruminants, they seem to be able to develop that bacteria a lot more easily on their own. I am unaware of giraffes ever being recorded practicing coprophagia. They're well known for doing osteophagia, of course, giraffes, and eating bones. Hello, Mr. Warty. Just to get the extra calcium, the extra phosphorus, all important when you're got those long, thin legs. Very important those bones are solid and able to handle the weight and the stresses. It's a very happy warthog. Nadine in my ears just reminded me of yesterday where we saw the banded mongoose having a little dip in the water and then having a roll around in the mud, which was something very unusual, something I'd never witnessed before. Hopefully we'll get to see that again. That was up at Lentore in Kenya at their lovely waterhole there, which doesn't provide much in terms of big game, but has provided some brilliant sightings over the last few months. We've had ground squirrels there, some beautiful birds, baboons, hamerkops, some interesting little things up there. The Egyptian goose family. Leopard lover, you're asking me if I've ever observed any unlikely animal friendships in the wild. Well, they do certainly occur. If I'm honest, I've stalled on that question for a minute or two to dredge the memory banks. The only one that I can think of that I've witnessed firsthand was in the western sector of the Sabi Sands many, many years ago, watching a male leopard. I think it was one that was called Neoleti, but there have been a few Neoletis over the years, but don't quote me on that. It might not have been him. Or was it one called Teguan? Could have been a Teguan male. Anyway, it was a male leopard feeding on a male Nyala, and there was also a hyena there, and the two of them were feeding quite happily next to one another on opposite sides of the carcass. But normally, a leopard would have grabbed that kill and tried to get up a tree, or wouldn't have even attempted to stand its ground against a hyena for risking injury and issues with future exploits. But these two sat there for about 15 minutes, quite happily feeding off the same carcass. I've never seen that before or after or since, but I can't think of any other unusual ones. And the most famous one that I can think of, which is something I've watched on a documentary, which is on that beautiful documentary called The Eye of the Leopard, made by Derek and Beverly Joubert, narrated by Jeremy Irons in his very dramatic fashion, which makes it highly entertaining, but beautiful cinematography throughout that documentary, and a wonderful story about Lacadema, the leopardess up in the Okavango Delta. But there was a one there where, as she was still sort of a youngster, she kind of adopted a young baboon and looked after that young baboon. And ultimately, the baboon died of exposure. I think it was a day or two later. But obviously, that maternal instinct just kicked in. But that's one I always remember watching. But yeah, anyone that I can recall seeing firsthand would be that hyena and Inyala. Well, the hyena and the leopard eating the Inyala. You often see things like they're on quarantine at Juma, lone male wildebeest often hanging out with the herd of impalas there, but I don't see that as friendship. That's just safety in numbers. That one makes perfect sense, but none others that I can think of. If any of you have witnessed such a thing firsthand, would be very interested to hear about it. Eric, I'm not sure if the warthog was eating mud. It may be eating some very short grass, but animals do practice geophagia, eating of the soil, in order to get essential minerals and vitamins and things out of the soil to their body. So I didn't actually register the precise behavior we were watching, but eating soil is not an uncommon behavior. In fact, was it last month? Yeah, well, sometime in early January when I did a live at the waterhole, we were at, I think it was the Kwamaratan waterhole in Pilansberg, and we watched two zebras that were using their teeth to scrape the soil and actually eat the mud on the shore of the waterhole there. So yeah, that's not uncommon. And Madikwe as well, I've seen it quite often during the dry season, just getting those bits of iron from the soil. That very red soil suggests it's rich in iron. There'll be phosphorus in there, calcium, other things that might have been deposited, maybe even salts in the soil as well. So it was quite possible, Eric. Our rhino seems to be slumbering quite nicely. Hopefully he'll come down for a drink at some point. But I think let's go back up to Old Donio and have a look at our giraffe. Maybe we catch that one also having a drink. Let's go check it out. Anybody taking the opportunity whilst there are no elephants monopolising the waterhole? A bit of giraffe hide and seek. Classic tentative approach to water drinking, being shown particularly by this giraffe, who, on the right, who may well be pregnant. Looking at her, she has a funny body shape. Whether it's the way she's standing, I'm not quite sure. But remember, giraffe babies are pretty large. Yes, I'd say she's pregnant. See the way the stomach is sort of quite distended and bulbous. I hope, anyway. Otherwise, Mrs. Giraffe, I'm sorry. Young giraffes are pretty enormous, weigh the same as a baby elephant, can be over 100 kilograms. Is that... Uh, there's definitely something moving in the stomach. I wonder if we can actually see the fetus moving. Whether that's her twitching, but I'm sure I can see some movement in the stomach there. Could we possibly seeing a baby giraffe kicking? Or am I dreaming? So I'm watching very carefully just that bit just in front of her pelvis. I'm sure I saw that flexing a minute ago. Whether or not it was a trick of the light, I'm not sure. But she does look very pregnant, and there's an awful lot of giraffe curled up inside there. So I suppose not impossible. Oh, I don't know, maybe it was a trick of the light. But either way, she was definitely pregnant. Ah, that's why the giraffe have moved off. but she'll be pregnant for 15 or 16 months. It's a long gestation period for giraffe. It's a very, very developed fetus that comes out, able to stand in sort of half an hour or so. And always say you have to admire a giraffe, a baby giraffe, of having to be able to manipulate and stand on those long legs very, very quickly after birth. There has to be a lot of development of the muscles and the bones to allow for that to happen. Well, I don't know, but I'm convinced. I don't know if anybody else saw it, but I'm convinced I saw some movement in that stomach, like a bulge that appeared and disappeared on more than one occasion. I see I've neglected a few of your comments coming through. Sorry, I was too busy fixated on that giraffe there. Joe Mello, you were enjoying the warthog. He was having a good time, certainly, back down there in the Eastern Cape. Johan O have been enjoying the oxpeckers, absolutely. Sean, you've also been enjoying the interactions of two different species. It is always nice when that happens. Nature is about an ecosystem made up of multiple facets and components, and it's held together by all those different interactions. And it is always fascinating to watch individuals of the same species, but particularly of other species and how they react and live together. Always very interesting to watch. Erica Oldner, you're saying you saw it move too, I assume referring to the giraffe. Well, I hope so, because that's something very special. We'll say that it was, I think, for a bit of drama, but I don't see why it wouldn't be possible. Not something I've ever seen, but I'm convinced I saw what in my mind was a hoof pushing up and down against the womb there. That reminds me of a scene from one of my all-time favourite movies when I was younger called Tremors. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Sort of a B-rate monster movie, basically, with large subterranean monsters that have tongues that look a little bit like sort of elephant trunks. I just got a flashback of Tremors. Those of you who've seen it will know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't will think I'm mad. But that's all right. But very cool to see some close-ups. Those nostrils, the little sensory hairs around the tip of the trunk. Very dignified, cross-legged pose. Oh, look at that beautiful cracked skin. Thousands of kilometers trodden through the wilds of Africa. And you can see how worn it is at the back compared to the front. That's the way an elephant places its foot down. It goes down heel first and then pivots forward and then drags that front toe. It's one of the ways you can identify movement of an elephant from its track. You look for the nice imprint at the back because the foot's been placed down solidly, and then it rocks forward, and then that little toe drag in the sand as it lifts its foot back up. Yeah, it's like having an old pair of running shoes that's had all the tread taken off. How nice is it to have these up close visuals of toenails and the skin texture and the way that trunk moves in every single direction. So to see those nostrils which are capable of expanding and or dilating and undilating, whatever the appropriate terminology is, the way they suction up water and their food. One of the only animals that actually manipulates air to help them feed in that manner. They're very special to get so close to these giants. See the way using those fingers just to scoop up the soil. And a little flick of the trunk, that's all it takes. Erica Old, know indeed that elephant foot can tell many tales, as can that tail as well, I would think. We've seen a couple of elephants recently that have had stunted tails. Trying to figure out how an elephant would lose its tail, possibly some sort of predator interaction when it was much younger. We saw one here at Old Gonya a couple of months ago that had no tail whatsoever. It was just like a smooth um, curve of the spine down to the groin area. No evidence of any trauma whatsoever. So my reaction to that was that it was a birth defect, a genetic defect, because there was no evidence of anything happening to it. But what actually causes an elephant to lose part of a tail if it's not from a predatory thing? I'm not honestly sure. Yeah, other than say potentially having it injured badly by a lion when it was a calf or something, I can't think what an elephant would do to injure its tail like that. Or unless it, yeah, maybe a thorn or a splinter that backed into something, maybe it got some sort of infection that caused it to, I'd say to fall off, but you know, if it was some sort of bacteria that ate through the tail from an infection. It is strange because it's not an uncommon sight to see an elephant with only a partial tail. But I'd never seen one before like we saw here a few months ago that had no tail whatsoever. So that I'm convinced is a genetic problem. We did see that elephant briefly yesterday at Elephant Pan in Botswana that had a very stunted trunk. and I would be very surprised to hear that if that wasn't caused by a snare or some sort of similar injury. That is, unfortunately, particularly in the north of Kruger, close to Mozambique and Zimbabwe, because of civil wars and the issues in Zimbabwe over the last 15, 20 years, has led to a lot of subsistence poaching and snare injuries. Oh, hello, little pied wagtail and a laughing dove. Yeah, that was some really beautiful up close views of that elephant by the water, but sounds like you might have some Ellies enjoying the water at Tau. Let's head back down to Madikwe. Oh, some little ones. Now we know for a fact there's at least 4 crocodiles in here, as we saw them wrestling over what we think was a piece of wildebeest a couple of days ago. So interesting to see whether the adults allow the youngsters into the water proper. I would think probably not, but you never know. It is how the elephants got their trunk, according to Rudyard Kipling, of course. Lovely to see elephants, zebras, and impalas, a 3-dimensional view. And a waterbuck. Oh, well, apparently the little ones are in the water. That's my fault for saying that they probably won't. Well, they stay close to the shoreline, and I think they've got some good nannies looking after them. They struggle to get out. Come on, climb. Oh, coming to their aid. Here comes Mum. Come on, get out. Oh, see how beautiful is that? Just imagine them. Right, now you've ruined it for everybody. Now we're leaving. see the young boys at the back following at a distance, doing their own thing, still playing around, trundling along. I wonder whether they'll be able to stop themselves from chasing all of these other animals. Zebras and zebras and waterbucks are chasing it. There goes one. Gotta chase some zebra. Loads of zebras. Sandy Franklin, no. Madikwe is not part of Kruger or Sabi Sands. It's on the other side of the country completely. So the whole Kruger area is in the low felts on the eastern side, just quite close to in fact, the boundary, the eastern boundary of the Kruger National Park borders Mozambique. So very much in the northeastern area of the country, whereas Madikwe, sorry, is way up in the northwest. So to drive to Madikwe from Hoedspruit, which is on the edge of the Kruger National Park where I am, takes around about 8 hours. To give you an idea, it's about 600 or 700 kilometers, I think. So a very different area, still beautiful in its own right, but not an open system like Kruger is, which in many areas is now, if one looks at the Transfrontier Parks, the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Park, open particularly in the north between the corresponding reserves in Zimbabwe and in Mozambique. So an enormous area. Now, Madikwe is an area in its own right up in the northwest. We're very close to the Botswanan border, close to Gaborone. Okay, well, looks like these ellies are melting off into the distance. I think let's head over to Elephant Pan, formerly known as Hyena Pan, now Elephant Pan in Botswana. Maybe we can find that elephant with half a trunk and see how he or she is doing. Oh, shame. Well, that there may be right on cue. Yeah, look at that. Shame, man. I'm sure most likely lost, say, to a snare. Whether this is the same individual we saw yesterday, I'm not 100% sure. My gut says this is a bit older than the one we saw yesterday. But still looks in good condition, so finding a way to deal with that handicap. Nadine's just asked my ear if there's a point, a point where if an elephant does lose a trunk, it does become a severe hindrance. And the simple answer is I don't know completely. I mean, that is one of the shortest trunks that I have seen. I have unfortunately seen quite a few elephants with that have lost parts of trunk, but that is one of the shortest ones that I've ever seen, or what's left. Um, and how it deals with it. I mean, obviously, it's going to have to get down and drink with its mouth. It's going to have to be able to find vegetation that it can get its mouth to. It will be able to sort of lasso branches with what's left of that trunk and bring the leaves and things to its mouth. It must be very difficult, but it still looked in good condition. So it's obviously finding a way. I think probably I can only think one of the biggest problems would be potentially what the integrity of the nostrils are like. I have seen one where some of the nostril has been completely closed. If both of them close and sort of scar up, I suppose they'd still be able to breathe through their mouth. So I don't know. It must be. I don't know, Nadine. But that is one of the shortest trunks that I have seen after an injury, however it may have been caused. So I've mentioned snares. It could have been a crocodile. It could have been an infection. Just the gut says snare. That's the most likely, having witnessed it. I remember one elephant in the sands many years ago. You could hear it coming a mile off just because of the noise that she made when she was breathing through that trunk. One nostril had completely scarred closed, so she only had one nostril available. Yeah, what this one is eating. I think is finding some. Is it a branch? We saw some here a few weeks ago that were picking something out of the ground, which I assumed was fruit that had maybe been washed down into the water. But that looked like little pieces of twig or stick, which is a bit unusual. Johan, oh yeah, it will be able to drink, otherwise it wouldn't do very well. But I've seen the one we saw yesterday was drinking at the sort of concreted pan where the water flow comes from. So again, it's just a question of making a plan, really. I've seen elephants feeding on termite mounds off the grass there, so the grass is more at head height and it doesn't have to bend the head right down to the ground in order to feed properly. She, I didn't actually think to see if it was a boy or a girl, is obviously getting enough water, otherwise, say, a week down the line, and that's going to be the end for that elephant. So yeah, making a plan somehow. Mindy Tillipau, yeah, very, very short indeed. So I've seen some nasty ones over the years, ones with bad injuries that have obviously been caused by snares and sort of gashes and trunks that are just sort of not fully attached anymore, but that's one of the shortest. Wild at heart, I was also thinking the same thing. It's one thing in summer when there's a surplus of vegetation, but in winter, when one has to get enough food, I suppose she still had tusks, so would be able to extract cambium, and is maybe just sort of chewing the cambium directly off branches, would still be able to get the tusk underneath, and could maybe just grip what she rips off in the mouth. But it will be interesting to watch during the winter months. Yes, Lady Macbeth, you've mentioned that one in Kruger with a hole at the top of the trunk. I've seen photos of that individual, but yeah, also seems to get by. So there is no option out there. It's get by or succumb. So you've got to keep at it, I suppose, and supremely resourceful animals. Oh, sorry everybody, we lost the feed there up at Elephant Pan. But we've zoomed all the way back down to Juma with some beautiful Inyala and some Impala. Wild at Heart, you're saying you saw an elephant get into a tussle with a crocodile that grabbed hold of its trunk at Vic Falls on the Cam a while back. That must have been very special to see, something I've never seen. But yeah, it does happen. There are records of it happening. And even if the crocodile isn't able to sever the trunk, which I think it probably wouldn't in one bite, there's the potential chance of infection, and maybe that the lower part of the trunk would ultimately uh, fall off, if that's the right word. So yeah, I'm throwing out snaring just as the most likely culprit, but there are other possibilities certainly. That's I know many of our regular viewers have had their run-ins or aware of other animals that have had their run-ins with snaring. It is an incredibly cruel technique or tactic for finding food, completely unspecies specific. Anything and everything can be damaged and get caught in snares. And so that's why there are many wonderful people who go out and do regular snare patrols, and any snares they find they will remove. Thank you for all the wonderful work that you do, and I wish there were more of you. Sarah, in the UK, you're commenting on how long the grass is at Juma. Yeah, and this is quite short. There are areas where it's chest height, head height. It's amazing how quickly things recover after a little bit of rain. And that's why many of the herbivore species give birth around December, January time. Plenty of food, plenty of shelter, plenty of water. But we're down to the last couple of minutes, so thank you everybody for all of your questions and comments. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Erica Oldnow, I think you've said you've enjoyed it. I'm very happy to hear that. And again, we've seen some wonderful things, some very interesting interactions and bits of behaviour. Elephant pool parties, always a bit of a treat. And I'm going to work on the basis that we did see a giraffe fetus kicking in that one up at Old Doniel, which is very, very special. And this is a nice way to finish with some of our lesser appreciated but equally beautiful members of the African, an Inyala and an Impala. Well, there is your answer. But it's been so nice to see all the animals enjoying themselves. Things drinking, things having mud baths. The warthogs, to see the rhino down at Founders was always special. Shame we didn't get to view of that python, but it'll be interesting to see tomorrow if anything does go and finish off that poor little impala. But amazing to think what goes on in the dead of night, and who knows what will happen later today. But that's about it. So thank you everybody for joining us. I hope your Monday continues to be as wonderful as it has been for the last 2 hours. I think Kelly will be joining you tomorrow for Live at the Waterhole, same time, 12:30 Central African time. But please enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you once again for being a part of the largest safari vehicle in the world.